how to avoid a trend is what I did. You see it, something's happening, ignore it, rinse and repeat, right? And eventually. Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 187 in the series. Welcome back to the dining room. It's lovely to see all of you. Sorry for my absence for a couple of weeks there. You probably didn't notice. Been busy. What you gonna do? The weather's warming up, and yeah, I'm getting kind of excited about the new seasons. It doesn't bother me that it's gonna be warmer because I just keep knitting through all of it. So there you go. If you are coming back to the podcast, it's great to see you. I hope we can hang out in the chat, in the comments, and chat a little bit, or over on the Ravelry group. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. This is a podcast that's mostly about garment knitting, design, modification. So we're going to do some of that today. I have a couple other finished objects we can talk about. But today we're also going to talk about trends. I know. You all think of me as not somebody who's up with the trends, and that is true, and that is good, and that is me. I have no idea what's going on in the trend world, and I try to keep it that way. So we're going to talk about that. Specifically, we're going to talk about what's with all the fish, because I've only just now figured that out, and I thought maybe I'd share it with you. If you are looking for me everywhere else, on the webs, I am Knitting the Stash everywhere, obviously here on YouTube, over on the, where is this? Instagram, Ravelry, and on the main website, which is knittingthestash.com. And that is where you can find all my online classes about garment design and modification. And you can find the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, where I feature small batch yarns from the US. And I'm hoping to maybe ramp that up again soon. It's been in a little bit of a lull because of the book writing about wool. It's a wool book. It's coming out soon, September, I think. And yeah, so that's where you can find me, Knitting the Stash. Let's get started with some non-trendy things, shall we? Okay, if you've been hanging out with me for any amount of time, you know that I tend to not follow the trends. I'm not a podcaster that knits the latest thing or follows some of the big designers for the most part. I have a few favorites, I will admit, to loving everything Isabell Kraemer does, for example. But I try to spread things out. I try to spread out the love. I try to find older patterns. I try to find lesser known designers. I try to find, do things with modification and just kind of like keep it fresh and keep it more interesting for me. Not to say that if you follow the trends, it's like a bad thing. Totally, my kid loves trends. He loves fashion. I'm on board with whatever you do. That's not me. So I will admit that when I started seeing all these fish show up in my Ravelry feed, I was like, what is going on with all the fish? And it took me a little while to do a little research, try to figure out what's going on, because I obviously missed all of the last spring's announcement that we were apparently going into the Fisherman Core era. Fisherman Core, what is that? Apparently it's like a fisherman aesthetic thing, like Ganzis, textured, Aaron's weight sweaters, fish everywhere, lobsters, like the whole 9 yards. So I just saw the fish and thought, wow, okay, everybody's making fish. But then it got to be overwhelming and I was like, what is up with all the fish? So there you go, Fisherman Core. I will let you know that in my research on this trend, I did find a few funny magazine articles, and I found some other YouTubers and knitters have put together like a Ravelry bundle of all like Fisherman Core patterns. I will include all that below in the description, and in case you're interested in checking this stuff out, because you know what? Now that we're headed into spring of 2026, I'm guessing Fisherman's Core is not quite as in fashion as it once was. So if you wanted to go for the Fisherman Core now, you'd be like me and be like totally out of touch. So go for it. But this is like Caitlin Hunter had a couple patterns. Isabell Kraemer had a pattern. It goes on and on. There's like fish socks. There's fish everything. Little fish purses. Like you name it. If it had a fish, it was big in 2025. So I also am putting my own list of patterns down below in the description or in the show notes, so that if you're interested in like what's happened more recently and you've missed the fish somehow, or if you're looking for the ways fish show up in patterns before 2025, I got you covered. I also did some archaeological looking at like fish motifs because I was just curious, like not thinking of it as a fashion trend, right? Because I'm so out of touch. I was like, what's going on with fish historically? Because that's what I do. And I found some really interesting, there was a really interesting article that's available on Google Scholar about fish motifs in ancient Egypt and in some of the other ancient cultures. So anyway, I will also link that PDF below if you're interested in the symbolism of the fish and how it's come up in textiles from, millennia ago. All right. How to avoid a trend is what I did. You see it, something's happening, ignore it. Rinse and repeat, right? And eventually you'll get to the new year and you're like, hey, what just happened? That's how you spot a trend, according to me. Oh, maybe some of you have managed to miss the fisherman core thing too. I would love to know. Let me know in the comments. Okay, so in the meantime, while not following fisherman core logic, I have been knitting random stuff as usual, with an eye toward lots of garment knitting, as usual. So what I have as a finished object for this episode is my Aldous sweater by Isabell Kraemer. One of the reasons I knit a lot of Isabell Kraemer is because I think she's a brilliant pattern designer and she writes really great patterns that are very modifiable. So for someone like me who likes to change sweaters all the time and really get in there, her patterns are easy to do that with usually. Plus when you knit a lot of someone's patterns, you kind of get to know their basic kind of like what their gauge looks like compared to yours, what their styling and sizing looks like compared to you. And if you can find a match like that and then you like the aesthetics of what they're putting out, it's easy to kind of just keep making sweaters by that person, which I'm guessing a lot of you may do. If you look back at your project pages, like you probably have 1 or 2 designers that you might be following around and making a lot of their things. So this is Aldous. This was not supposed to be Aldous. I'll just start with that. So this yarn combo was supposed to be used for the Marlin sweater by Yuan Hua Li, and I talked about that on a few episodes ago. This was a very special combo of yarn. It was a beautiful indie dyed yarn from my friend Megan, who she broke out her dye pots for like a month back, maybe last fall, and asked a few of us if we wanted anything. So I asked for this one, which I think was called Patient Zero. It is a superwash yarn fingering weight. It's kind of what Megan specializes in. I have a bin of her skeins up in my yarn room. I love her yarn. She's no longer really making yarn, which makes me sad. But I totally understand and support her. But when she breaks out the dye pots, I'm there. And so this is an old colorway that I asked if she could remake, and she did. So I had 3 skeins of this, and I also had this Nature's Luxury mohair left over from a birthday present from Spencer. So I decided to combine the two. And this is actually, I had to rip out a sleeve. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But this is the result of ripping out a sleeve. And if you have ever tried to rip out a sleeve that includes mohair and another yarn and then try to separate those yarns later, it becomes nearly impossible. This is kind of like the yarns have fused together in so many different senses of the world. They've twisted around each other. My husband and I, Spencer and I, tried to separate this yarn last night and it just did not work out. So I'm either gonna knit it as is and do something kind of like chunky funky with it, or it might just forever live in this ball state, which would be kind of sad. But I will talk about that sleeve and why I had to rip that out in a minute. I thought the combo of those 2 yarns together was really brilliant because alone, I felt like Megan's color, I wasn't sure that I could pull off a sweater, like wearing a sweater in this, because I kind of described it as like My Little Pony unicorn like colorway, because it just is so, and that's good according to me, because I love unicorns and My Little Ponies when I was little. But I thought, can I pull off wearing a sweater that's this blue? But when I combined it with the mohair, it just kind of fuzzed the whole thing out. It went from like pixelation, like I was doing with the Light Bright sweater from a couple episodes ago, to this much more kind of like marly, blendy kind of look. I did not swap out skeins as I went. So this is like 1 skein, 2 skeins, 3, like I didn't swap them out. I didn't helically do anything fancy. I just knit with the skeins of yarn and the mohair because it was a variegated yarn and the mohair just softened the whole thing. So I actually don't see, this is also like bravo to Megan, because her yarn did not, it didn't end up with any kind of color blocking. It was just, I love her yarn. Anyway, I wish I could get more of it all the time. Anyway, so this, I thought the color came out really nicely in the end. And one of the reasons that I went away from the Marlin sweater, there were a couple reasons actually. I do have the pattern, I downloaded it, I read it. It was written in such a way that I knew it would require a lot of like maths and digging into the pattern, and I had just come off knitting the Kaylee sweater by Zanette Knits, and I was like not in the mood for that kind of thing. I also was looking at the neckline, and the neckline for that one has a folded collar on the neckline, and it looked a little bit, I've had some bad luck with those kinds of collars in terms of like looking good on me. So I just hesitated enough to say, I'm not gonna knit that one, I'm gonna knit something else. And the Aldous caught my eye because it's Isabell Kraemer. It has some cool features, like this faux seam line down the back and these faux seam lines down the sides. It has a split hem. And I also just really wanted like a fun, cozy sweater, a simple stockinette knit after doing the Kaylee sweater. My mannequin is wanting to flop around a lot today. We'll see if she can stay upright. So that's how I ended up with Aldous. And I love it, but let me tell you about some of the things that I did. Not quite working perfectly engaged as usual, in part because I was using both of those yarns together. So I think I ended up knitting a slightly different size than I normally would have, if I'm remembering right. But luckily for me, Isabell Kraemer's designs tend to be pretty spot on for like the key points in a pattern, like shoulder width and bust circumference and yoke depth, things like that, that are, if you don't have a pattern that tends to fit those things, those are some of the big math modification zones in a sweater. And I talk about this in a lot of my other videos, but like things like yoke depth, things like neck width, shoulder width, all those things can be real moments where you need to like intervene in the pattern if your body doesn't match a standard, right? Like, and none of us do. So if you know that I have wide shoulders, you have a larger bust, you have shallower yoke or a deeper yoke, like those are the places where you tend to modify things. For me, Isabell Kraemer's patterns tend to be pretty good. I did need to modify the yoke because it was going to be too deep, and not because it was totally designed to be too deep. It was designed to be a little bit too deep for me, but I also was working on a different row gauge. So I actually combined some of the increases for the body and the sleeves in the end, like the last kind of round of them, I smushed them together rather than separating them. And that saved me, I want to say it was like 10 or 12 rows, which amounts to a couple of inches in terms of the yoke depth. So it's the right yoke depth. Love this sweater. I immediately took this sweater and put it on, and I haven't taken it off until right now. Like it's been my sweater for like the last week. This also has really pretty Latvian braids on the hem down here, and then on the cuffs. One of the things I ended up doing, because I was working with this kind of like yarn that wanted to stick to itself because of the mohair, I ended up only carrying the mohair on one part of the strand for the Latvian braid, which was fine because you can't actually notice that. If you look closely, you really don't know that I only used one strand of mohair in here instead of two. Looks just fine. I did the split hem, and this has not been washed. I should say that. It looks fine because it's superwash yarn, so superwash tends to just drape and be fine. It's not quite, obviously it doesn't have any texture to the stitches, so there's not it's not like cables where they need to relax or anything like that. Superwash yarn, I've been wearing it around on my body underneath a down kind of coat and things like that, so it's definitely relaxed itself. But I did only steam a couple places where I was trying to figure out what was going on. So I think I steamed the hem just to figure out what was going on. It does have a split hem, and this is a really nice split hem where you're not just splitting the hem, you're actually doing some design work to put one in front of the other so that you create a little bit of a, I don't know what you'd call that, like an overlap. That's what you would call it. And once I wash this, you can see it's kind of gotten to be a little bit wonky, just fresh off the needles. Once I wash this, this will all relax into the right zone of happiness. I don't know, is that a word for knitting? Hi, Millie. Millie's come to visit the camera right now. In the back, you have this faux seam line. I wanted to mention, I found another knitting pattern that has some really cool vertical stripes. I will put it in the show notes and I'll put a picture up here so you can see it. One of the things about this pattern, it's a free pattern, is that you learn from the video tutorial how to go back in with a crochet hook. And if you create these kinds of vertical lines with purl stitches in your sweater, let's say it's a plain stockinette sweater, and you create some vertical lines at various places on the sweater, you can go back in with your crochet hook and basically create these knit stitches that fill in. You can see, you know, when you have a purl stitch in stockinette, it's going to look like a little bit of a divot. But if you go back in and fill it in with knit stitches with your crochet hook, you can actually create quite an interesting, what looks just like a vertical line, like, and the only other way you do that is like through embroidery or intarsia or something, you know, it's a cool kind of like argyle-y in this particular sweater, almost argyle-y kind of look. But anyway, I loved learning that technique from the video, and I will share it with you below in case you're interested in checking it out. And one of my next sweaters is a downtown hoodie for Spencer, and that I haven't started it yet. I just ordered the yarn. And he has requested that it have a little bit of a like decorative element. So what I'm going to do is create some of these fake, you know, seam lines with like a purl stitch in different places on the sweater, maybe in the back, maybe on the sleeve, something like that. And then go back in and with a contrast color, create a vertical line so that there's a little bit more visual interest for that sweater. Yeah, so anyway, this is like a little bit of an aside about this one, but it made me think about all the different ways that if you have a plain stockinette sweater, you could do some really interesting purl stitches. Like if you wanted to create a pattern that had, I don't know, like a stalactite, stalagmite kind of a thing with contrasting colors, but you didn't want to work color work, or if you wanted to have a pattern down at the bottom, if you create your purl stitches and then you go in and do this vertical technique with the crochet hook, you can just, you're like, it's an unlimited palette of coolness. Like you could do a lot of different things with that technique. So I thought I'd bring it up. Now, let me talk about the sleeve. Let's talk about what happened with this sleeve and why I have this ball of yarn. When I first knit, one of the other mods I did is provisional cast on for the underarm. And then I only cast on, I think I cast on maybe 2 to 4 stitches fewer than were called for in the pattern. And at that point I had not looked to see, I was good on the circumference of the sweater bust measurement, but I hadn't looked to see the sleeve circumference because that's usually not a problem for me. I used to have like big guns back when I was doing a lot of like martial arts and stuff and sword work and whatnot, but my guns tend to be a little more modest these days. So having like a larger sleeve up here, for me, I know this is an issue for a lot of knitters. I don't really worry too much about sleeve circumference because patterns tend to be within a range that's fine for me. And I did not think to myself, oh, if I subtract a couple of stitches out from the cast on at the underarm, that my sleeve would be too tight. So I went on and knit an entire sleeve without thinking to myself to check, just to double check, using my gauge, that the sleeve circumference would be okay up here. So when I finished that sleeve, I pulled on the sweater, and it was definitely like this. You get some ease here, like this regular old sweater, you get some ease. It was kind of more skin tight, and I'm not going to show you this because I took a video of it so you can see what it looks like, because I went ahead and knit the other sleeve with much more ease built into it. Not much more, but enough more. And I'll put the video in here so that you can see what that first sleeve looked like versus the second sleeve. It was a choice. Whenever you knit, we know this from like socks and sleeves, whenever you knit a first one and it's not quite right, sometimes the best thing to do is to knit the second one correctly, or at least fix the problem with the first one and then go back and reknit the first one, rather than reproduce the mistake that you made and then have to reknit both. It's a risk, because when you do something new on the fix, it might not be perfect either, and then you gotta kind of decide what to do. For me, one of the issues was that I couldn't cast on tons more stitches in the underarm. And I knew that I wasn't going to pull the whole sleeve out. I ended up actually only pulling the sleeve out to, say, the last 2 inches before I reknit it. I just knew what I needed to do. I thought what I needed to do was to not have as many decreases. So basically, because of the number of stitches that I had cast on and that were written into the pattern, I didn't have that much to work with. So I couldn't really, unless I wanted to pull the whole sweater out, I didn't have that much leeway. So with that second sleeve, I did fewer reductions all the way down, and I spaced them out much further. So these sleeves are both good now, but I basically did like 1, 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 reductions in the sleeve versus like what the pattern called for, which I think was like 7 or 8. So that was my fix for that sleeve, as you saw in the video. And then I went ahead and took out the other sleeve, which became this ball of mess, and reknit it so that it had the same ease as the newly reknit sleeve. So that was the biggest kind of like wildness with this sweater, but I absolutely love the way it came out. I love it. Like I said, Millions in the Bark. Like I said, I basically took this thing off the needles and put it on and didn't take it off until now. So I do need to wash it and see what happens with it. I know that it's super wash, so it's going to stretch out a little bit. That also determined how long I made the sweater. I didn't make it super long, so that when and if it does stretch a little bit, there'll be some play for that. I also noticed that with the addition of the mohair, it gave the sweater a lot more structure than what I've seen with knitting just straight superwash sweaters in the past. Superwash sweaters tend to, hang and not have a lot of memory because they don't have the elasticity of a natural wool. But adding the mohair, or as with the light bright, adding the color work, these kinds of things can add structure to superwash and create like a scaffold for the superwash yarn to like have something else to hang on to. So I'm hoping that when I wash this, given that it has the mohair built into the entire sweater, that will kind of act as a little bit of a stabilizer for the entire sweater. So we'll see how that goes. But this is Aldous by Isabell Kraemer. Super happy with it. Love it. Maybe not on trend, like it's not fisherman core, but it is adorable and I love it, and I feel like a little bit of a little kid wearing it because of the color palette. Yeah, I'm in love with that sweater. So yeah, anyway, that's Aldous. The other thing I finished is my Musselburgh and Light Bright Had a Baby and It Was a Hat project. So a lot of you are wondering how this was going to turn out. I basically took the color fade from the Light Bright sweater and married it to the basic structural pattern for the Musselburgh and made this hat. I also noticed as I was doing this that the Light Bright folks, Woolen Pine, did come out already with a kind of longer cowl of this fade. So there are, if you're not interested in trying to figure this out on your own, they do have a kind of version of it that, for cowls at least, that you could go and check out. So the Musselburgh does this, right? It sits inside itself, so it's like a double layer hat. I'm trying to get it to actually go right now on camera. It doesn't work. So I decided to make this a short kind of cap, in part because this is superwash yarn. Again, it's going to stretch out and relax quite a bit, though the color work again will hold it and give it some structure. But I just wanted a cap. I didn't want a folded brim. I just wanted something that would be like simple that I could put underneath other hats, because I often have to wear 2 or 3 hats when we're out on our walks. So the cool thing about this version is that if you turn it this way, you have the white fading down to like almost like a blue at the bottom. And if you turn it the other way, which is easier once you get it all put together, you end up with a hat that is very blue-green, teal, going down to a little hint of the lighter white colors down at the bottom. So it's a very multi-purpose hat. A bunch of you were kind of asking me, like, what's gonna happen, you know, when you do the fade? You know, it's just, you're just gonna end up with, like, how is it gonna be different? How is it gonna, you know, end up living up to your aesthetic dream? But it totally did, because we have the blue into the white this way, and if you flip it over, you have the white into the blue. And that's partially because there's no flip up, like there's no turned up brim or anything like that. But I love this hat, and I need to get everything in the wash. I just need to. So once I wash it, I will take some photos and let you know how it turned out in terms of stretchability. It's definitely a smaller size than a lot of hats that I would normally wear. I usually go for the kind of slouchy beanie look. This is a little more of a tight cap. And that's, like I said, because I wanted to wear it just like this underneath other hats. So you could do whatever you want with your Musselburgh meets Light Bright Has a Baby, but this is my version of it, and I love it. And this is like maybe the 4th, 5th, 6th Musselburgh I've done. Brilliant pattern, really lovely, and the color fade from the Light Bright is super interesting. It will keep you occupied if you're knitting. I will note that my version, I skipped some of the lighter colors, because the lighter colors I thought overwhelmed the darker colors in the original sweater. So I just have, I skipped an entire, I might have skipped an entire skein of yarn here. So this might just be a 4-color fade. I'm trying to remember. I think it might be. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that made it a little shorter. Obviously that was one of the other things I was going for. And it allowed me to have this completely reversible hat. So you have the teal at this side and the white at this side, and once you put them inside each other, as you just saw, you end up with one hat that looks like this and one hat that looks like this. So yeah, so anyway, that is the Musselburgh Light Bright Had a Baby, and it's a hat. So the other thing I'm working on right now that is almost finished, and I will share it with you, is the Lenu hood. That's the other thing I've noticed trending, right? I mean, it's all these hoods. Everybody has a hood. Everybody has a hood. I've knit a bunch of hoods. They're really useful and practical, especially if you go walking like I do in the cold. So this is the Lenu hood, and it's kind of meant to go with the Lenu sweater, I think in part because the Lenu sweater has this is Ankestrick. The Lenu sweater has a really interesting textured panel running down the back, and maybe it's just on the back, I can't remember. But this is meant to mimic that. So you have this interesting textured pattern running down the back of the hood and the top. And if you were to pair this with your sweater and knit it in the same yarn as your sweater, you know, it makes the sweater almost look like a hoodie. Like it just kind of hangs back. Anyway, I knit mine in another beautiful superwash dyer. I don't do a lot of superwash, but when I do, I just embrace it, and I'm okay with that, and I hope you are too. This is Casual Fashion Queen. I love her yarn. I have a couple of her skeins of yarn, and this is a superwash merino nylon, and the colorway is called the Spider's Lullaby. And I was in love with it because it's purple and a little bit of like orange and all the good things. So when I got this skein of yarn, and I like to support a lot of my indie dyer buddies because I think they're doing cool work and they're making art, and it's important to support people. So I love her yarn. And especially now that Megan is not here, I need my new indie dyer to support. So one of the things that I did with this is I wanted to blend it again. So I had an extra skein of this yarn left over, this mohair, and it was again just kind of like a perfect pairing of this weird light purple that didn't go with anything before I started knitting with it, but now it goes with everything. And I think you can see it created again this kind of blended fuzziness to the fabric, which I absolutely love. It makes it warmer, and this thing is still very, very lightweight, but super warm. So I can wear this as an underlayer again, and because of the mohair, it's gonna be super, super warm. It has a seed stitch panel in the middle, mostly plain stockinette with some increases and decreases, and a ribbed bottom. And I will say, down here, I ran out of the yarn. I was trying to salvage it from this ball, but I ran out, and you can see the difference. This is a much brighter, this is if you just work the yarn by itself, you get a much brighter look to the fabric. versus working it with the mohair, you get this completely muted version of the colors, which is, I just think that's such a cool thing to do when you hold a yarn together with another yarn and you end up with a new color, or a new kind of like feel to the whole project. So as I was knitting this, I was regretting knitting a hood a little bit because the yarn is so beautiful. I thought, oh, this would have been really great in one of those patterns that's almost like a stained glass effect. Would this have been better showcased if I had kind of framed it a little bit more with a more of a plain color, like a solid color? But I'm pretty happy with this the way it is because it's warm, it's light, and I got to actually use a skein rather than putting it in my stash. I bought it and I used it, and that's great, and I'm very happy with that. This will get a layer around the front where you can add an I-cord so that you can pull it tight. The other modification I did is that I made the actual face part a little bit longer. I have one of these hoods. It's great, it's thicker, it's like amazingly warm, but it ends up kind of sitting right here, and that feels a little bit awkward. So this one will sit a little bit more at my chin. If I wanted to put a cowl underneath it or around it, I could, but at least that way I'm not kind of like submarining in my knitwear. So I extended this portion of the pattern just a little bit. And yeah, everything else I think is pretty good. I think it's pretty much what the pattern calls for. So there you go. That is the Lenu hood by Ankestrick, and it is just about done. So it will be done in time for me to wear it for these last little, hopefully, last weeks of winter here. We'll see. That's what my knitting life has been like lately. It's been a lot of fun. Definitely not on trend. Very much not on trend. Maybe someday I'll get on trend, who knows. Oh, and I should have mentioned at the beginning, you all usually ask what I'm wearing, speaking of on trend or not. This was this was in Amirisu, which is a Japanese knitwear magazine. So this is Bisu by Paula Pereira. I've did a couple of Paula Pereira's designs. This one was meant to be, I think, knit in, I want to say it was like a lighter summer yarn, because that issue was for like summer or spring. And I think it was meant to have short sleeves and all the other things. So I just made it into a long sleeve sweater out of some beautiful New Zealand yarn. I was doing a fun exchange with a friend in New Zealand at that point. Love this yarn. Have not found it before or since, but it is worn really nicely. It's a very warm yarn. And by the way, if anyone's listening to me, which I doubt you are, and you want a trend for like 2026 or 2027 or 2028, it doesn't matter to me. Let's bring back the Henley. Can we? Can we take the Henley back from like babies and men and just like make it a cool sweater again? Because I love Henleys. I need more Henley designs. Maybe I'll do an episode on that. Anyway, it's been lovely to hang out with all of you today. Thanks for coming to the dining room with me and checking out the knits and talking about the trends. Special thanks to the Patreons who make this podcast possible. That's Lenore, Jennifer, Rose, Kendra, Nargis, Tony, Laura, and Bethany. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who sends comments and shares this and does all the things. I appreciate it. And I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.